There's so many aspects of the spiritual path that are just so confusing to the human mind, because we're always living on all these levels simultaneously. And even when the masters come into this world, they play the same game that we play. There is a story that Swami Deanda tells about the life of Yogananda, of Master, when in Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda talks about the time that his own father met Sri Yukteswar, and Sri Yukteswar told Yogananda's father that his son, Yogananda, was behaving very badly and that there were many things to be concerned about. And when his father came to him, Yogananda himself knew that his guru had vastly exaggerated what the problem was. And as Master writes it in his autobiography, it was a sweet moment for him when he could go to Sri Yukteswar and actually be right instead of being wrong. And Sri Yukteswar apologized for exaggerating the errors, exaggerating Yogananda's foibles. So that's a little vignette. It's just presented in Autobiography of Yogi. It just stands by itself. Later on, when Swami Kriyananda was living with Master, Master explained to him what the issue was. Now, the issue was that there was a peer of Yogananda's, a fellow student, and Yogananda Master was trying to convert that man to the spiritual path. He wanted him to become a disciple. He knew he had great spiritual potential. In fact, Master recognized his fellow student as his own disciple. And so he was fulfilling his destiny, Yogananda's destiny, to take care of this soul. That man later became Swami Deanda. He became so dedicated to the path, he became a sannyasi. When Yogananda was in America and the work was beginning to grow, and Yogananda bought Mount Washington in Los Angeles in 1925, he sent for Deanda from India. Come, I'm doing a work in the West, come and help me. And then he put Deanda in charge of Mount Washington so that Yogananda himself could travel around the country on his spiritual campaigns looking for his disciples. Master went back and forth across the United States, visiting the major cities. He was a phenomenon as a lecturer. Thousands of people came, but Master wasn't finding thousands, he was finding individual disciples. So while Master was away doing this, Deanda began to think, what do I need Yogananda for? I have all this charisma, all these people like me, and I like being in the West and all of this. And he began to think about things very differently. Eventually, Deanda decided not to be a sannyasi anymore. He married what is lovingly called a white woman, which is like someone like me. I have to just parenthetically say here, and I am embarrassed to say this, I didn't know I was a white woman until I was about 40, and an Indian friend of mine referred to a friend of his marrying a white woman, and I said, like me, which honestly gave me a picture of race in America, because a black person in America would have known what their race was, but I never knew what mine was until I saw it by contrast. So anyway, so Deanda marries a white woman. And then eventually Deanda files a lawsuit against Yogananda, takes an enormous amount of money from him, causes him tremendous amount of grief, goes off and becomes a professor somewhere in the Midwest, which is what he did for the rest of his life. Every year, Yogananda would send him a case full of mangoes. Every year, Deanda, now whatever his other name was, would send the case back unopened. Right. Yogananda said simply, he will never find God except through this instrument. And then he also said that it would only take Deanda 3 more lifetimes, and then he would balance the karma, and he would be freed. It's all quite a story, isn't it, the whole thing? So then we go back to this incident in Autobiography of a Yogi, and what Sri Yukteswar was upset about is that Yogananda was trying hard to convert this young man and bring him onto the path. And Sri Yukteswar was trying to protect Master from the inevitable, because Dhirananda caused an enormous amount of trouble. It basically took Mount Washington virtually to the ground. They were stone broke. That was the period of time when they had to grow tomatoes on the hillside, and it was quite something, plus the terrible publicity. But it was destiny for Master to convert him. It was destiny for all of this to happen. And in fact, Yogananda at the time said to another friend, "Oh yes, eventually he will betray me and marry a white woman." But when it actually happened, when he actually did all of that, Dhirananda did all of that, as Swami put it, Master acted as if, you know, his best friend had betrayed him and he was utterly distraught, but he himself had predicted it. And Sri Yukteswar knew it was going to happen. The only way Swami could describe it is, if you've seen the movie once before, you just go through the story anyway, even though you know what's going to happen. You don't always say to yourself, "Oh, now he's going to do this and she's going to do that and this is what's going to happen." You just enter into the stream of it and let it happen. So this whole complicated, is it now, is it then, is it past, is it future? And then Master knowing sort of how to carry on afterwards, predicting what's going to happen later, whereas most of the rest of us can't really remember what we had for lunch yesterday. You know, and if we don't look at our appointments, we're totally surprised when someone shows up to talk to us. It's like we're living in all these different universes at the same time. But when the masters talk to us about self-realization, when they talk to us about shifting our consciousness completely, they don't talk about this arduous effort to acquire something. You know, we don't have to go and just sort of like check off, well, I've done 10,400 kriyas, now I've done 10,500 kriyas, now I've done, you know, and so that means like 2 more years and then I'll be here. It just, when I first heard about the spiritual path and Yogananda had the phrase, "You have within you a portable paradise." I've shared this with you before. For some reason, that just stuck in my mind. And I decided that it would take me 5 years. Do not ask me where that number came from. I just made it up out of nothing, and it had absolutely no validity, none whatsoever. But in some way, I just did the math and came up with 5 years. Crazy, completely crazy, but somehow I guess it gave me incentive. I don't know what to say about it. But we're always sort of calculating it as if, as if we had a clue. Because the human mind just likes to sort of be in charge and thinks that it's smart in all these ways. But what the masters tell us is not that we acquire anything, and that's where the word realization comes from. When you realize something, it was always there. It's just like, oh, we use the phrase, oh, I just realized I have an appointment tomorrow morning, whatever it might have been. But it wasn't like I acquired it. It's like I didn't know it, and now I know it. And they absolutely assure us that the entire process of spiritual awakening is just exactly that. I'm awakening. And now I know something that I didn't know. And when I was asleep, I didn't know it. As many of you know, I've been moving around the planet quite a bit in the last months, last year or two. And when I'm really in the midst of really moving, you come out of that sleep state, and I've learned now not to move until I can calculate where I am. You know, how high is the bed off the floor? How close is the wall? You know, what are the obstacles? Because otherwise, I have done some very odd things. You know, if you try to get out of bed when it's actually a wall, you know, it's not pleasant, let's just put it that way. But it's not like the room wasn't there when I went to sleep. It looks just the same, but I don't realize where I am and what the obstacles are. The masters always use the story of being asleep and being awake to try to tell us what it is, to come into God realization. And now, so many people, there have been so many death and return stories. I often reference them because they're so vivid in terms of showing us who we are and who we aren't. We live in this body for a whole incarnation. It starts small, it grows up to a certain point, then it begins to decline. I'm in the other end of the cycle now. You sort of get to the point where everything's getting better, and then everything gradually gets worse, or at least let's just use the word different. I can still go down onto the floor, but getting up is not pretty, And it's just like all of a sudden, the body that used to do things, like open the jar, it just would open the jar. Now it just laughs. It's just the same hand, same brain, but it's not the same anymore. Everything apparently keeps changing. But all the masters and these death and return experiences tell us that just that which is actually you has been untouched by this entire experience. It's exactly like it is the ocean and the waves. We watch all the waves rise and fall, and the tide comes in and out, but the ocean is not made into anything else by all that seeming movement, even though we can observe it, and it's calm, and it's high tide, and it's low tide, and it's storm, and it's crashing against the rocks. But it crashes against the rocks, and then it just sails out again. And you don't see any bruises, you don't see any fractured limbs. It's just all movements of energy. But we become so narrow in our awareness that the only thing we know about is the movement of the wave, and we just lose track of the fact that we're part of the ocean. So the masters tell us again and again, and Jesus was saying the same thing in his, he had to speak. All of the masters, every avatar, comes to this world with the same state of consciousness, with the same revelation. They all see the truth of reality, of existence, exactly the same. But they come into the world because of the longing. As we say in our Festival of Light, a prayer of love went up from earth and you responded. A ray of your light flashed out from the heart of infinity, burst downward through night skies of consciousness. Swami put this in such vivid terms. Burst downward through night skies of consciousness and was born on earth for the redemption of mankind in human form. A prayer of love went up from earth. The avatar doesn't sort of come randomly to impose himself on us. I'm using the male pronoun. I asked Swamiji, why is it that the avatars are always men? Because, of course, women ask me this question on a regular basis. And Swami's answer was, he said, well, they could choose to be whatever gender they want, and yet consistently, you have many, many advanced souls. You have free souls in female bodies. It's not as if a female body cannot be liberated, but the avatars are always male. And he said, as far as I have ever been able to know, and Swami agreed, he said, the avatar can choose the body. They choose the male body because it's a masculine kind of job. It's not a question of men or women. It's that to be an avatar is to come and to make everything different, to act in the world, to create a field of energy that will last for generations and generations. That's masculine work. And he also said, generally speaking, a male body has more freedom than a female body, generally speaking. He said, when the women saints come, and he used both Gyanamata as an example and also especially Anandamoyi Ma, who was a free soul. It wasn't a question of her realization, but Ma just behaved like a mother. She never actually did anything. She just sat there and radiated her divine consciousness and changed the lives of tens of thousands of people. But it was by being more than by doing. She was illiterate. She never wrote a book. She never made an organization. In fact, she would call the places where she lived your ashram, your magazine, your organization. She never identified with any of it. And in fact, when Master met her in India, he asked her, tell me something about your life. And she said, well, I was born and I was the same. I was a child and I grew up and I was the same. I was a woman and I was married and I was the same. And in fact, interestingly, I was reading a little biography about Ma recently. And she said when she was born as a baby, she didn't cry. She didn't struggle in any way. She was just completely quiet and still, fully awake, eyes open. And Ma says, oh, she was born in a village, and she was born in a little kutir, a little hut. And she said it was, I think the season was the sunshine season. And she said there was a beautiful pattern of light and leaves out the window. This is her memory of emerging from the womb. And she didn't see any reason to cry because she was so enamored of the light and the leaves in the window. That was her consciousness all the way through. But when these avatars come, an avatar comes with a world-changing mission. We misunderstand because many souls can be self-realized, but not necessarily avatars. These are nuances of this. But the avatar has a mission. And, Yogananda has come multiple times that we know about, and probably many others that we don't know about. And always he comes in this context where he's taking on a great transforming task. That's what Jesus did. The nobility of Judaism, which is a true religion, Moses was a great master, had become, it had devolved, especially by the influence of a corrupt priesthood. And there was a remnant of the truth left in the Essene community. Jesus was born into the Essene community, and then he took on the challenge of that corrupt priesthood. Him driving the money changers out of the temple. The money changers, this was one of the, these are the esoteric things you learn later. The temple, you had to come and you had to give offerings because it was all very calculated. You offer 4 doves and 3 lambs and whatever you do, and then if this has been your problem, and then you offer these 4 doves, then it's all wiped away. I mean, these things happen because human nature being what it is, people get in positions of power and they start using it. So you had to buy your offerings from the marketplace inside the temple, and you couldn't use your local money, you had to use temple money. So you came in, you had to change your local currency for temple money. And gosh, surprise, surprise, the money changers took a percentage, which went back to the priests. Jesus was outraged. You've made of my Father's house a marketplace, and he drove them out with a whip. This is a very dynamic way of saying things. But Jesus then, every avatar who comes is bound by the culture into which he has stepped. And he's also bound by the capacity of his disciples to understand what he's saying. Because that prayer of love that goes up from earth, the power of it is not how many people pray, it's the power of the prayer. This is what I was saying about Master. He crisscrossed the country, and he was setting a wave of energy in a new culture to set in the ether a storm of understanding. I mean, a vortex of understanding that would draw many people into it. But he was also looking for his disciples, just one after another. I realized that Swami Kriyananda in 1978, went back and forth across the United States twice, from California to New York and back, on what we called afterwards the Joy Tours. And he had a motorhome and a big van, and he took 12 or so people from Ananda village and went and back and forth, and went to all these different cities like this. And Swamiji afterwards calculated the success of that tour, not by the fact that we'd lost a lot of money, which we did, but by the people who came to be part of Ananda afterwards. And he named many people who became significant leaders after that, including here, David Praver was in Denver. Bildo Cicero was in Houston. Latika was in Washington, D.C. I mean, Mary Kretzmann was, she came somewhere, because she was in Arkansas, but they came to some place that was close to that. I can just go like this. Swami just crisscrossed the country looking for those souls, and one by one they came. Oliver Rogers was one of 5,000 people in an auditorium in the balcony. And when Oliver said to Master, I was there, Master said, I know, I remember. You know, it's completely, it's completely different than what we think it is. We measure this world by the standards that don't count. Am I successful? Does everybody love me? Am I beautiful? None of that is the issue. The issue is entirely, are we changing our consciousness? Are we just living in reaction to just one physical force pushes us this way, another pushes us that way, this pushes us this way, this is what people think, this is what's on the social media? Or are we day by day waking up, you know, every day, you know, where is the wall? Where is the way out? How do I move in this world so that I can actually know? So Jesus spoke to his disciples in ways that they understood. So he talked about sheep, and he talked about wheat, he talked about grapes, he talked about wine, he talked about wineskins. You know, the fields are white to the harvest. A few of us are having fields that they're making for the harvest, but the majority of us are not, and I don't think any of us are making wineskins. You know, a few people may brew beer on their own, but we don't put them in wineskins anymore. We don't know anything about wineskins. These were very, very vivid stories for his disciples. So when he said the fields will be 4 months before they're ripe, before they're ready to be harvested, everybody knew exactly what he was saying. And so when he said, but the field is ready now, you just don't know it, people would say, what? What could he be talking about? He was trying to just give us an image that we could grasp, that we could say, oh, I think I have to wait. I think I have to earn realization. I think it's a merchant's bargain that unless I do all of these things, only then will I have the grace of God. We don't understand that it's right here and it's right now, and that at any point we can feel that joy of the divine. And sometimes God pushes us in ways just to show us. There's a remarkable story I read about a man who was in one of the more recent wars, and he became a prisoner of war in a circumstance in which he was frequently tortured. And he was a soul who loved Christ, but he found himself in what anyone would think of as unbearable situation. And finally, as he said it, you know, his human resources to endure what he was enduring just absolutely were used up. He had nothing left that he could call himself in order to handle it. And he was in the midst of actually being tortured by some crazy poor person who thought that was a good thing to do. And he said at that point, he surrendered to Jesus in a way that he had never imagined was possible. What does that mean? What did that feel like to him? Those are the words that he used. He said, in that moment, he said the one who was torturing him stopped, and he was never touched again after that. And so he asked himself the question, for that level of attunement to the presence of God with me, you know, was I actually being tortured or was I being blessed? You see how confusing it gets? Every saint, every master who finishes the race, who keeps the faith, as St. Paul said, who fights the good fight. Those are his great three phrases. I fought the good fight. I kept the faith. I finished the race. I love those, all of them. Everyone who does that says, oh, it was just waves on the ocean. It's not merely like they say, oh, it was awful. It was terrible. But, you know, now that it's finished, you know, I'm so glad to be here. They don't say that at all. They say it was never what you thought it was. All the time, the divine was as much with you, always. You know, I myself, I'm not speaking from realization when I say those words. I'm speaking from a hint of understanding, from a hint of knowing, wow, what would my life look like? What would my inner life look like if I could never forget that? That it's always now. That it's always the moment, that my moment of final freedom is now. And it's now because it's always now. You know, words are inadequate for it. But why do we think otherwise? Why are we allowing ourselves to be hypnotized by the up and downs of the waves? Now, that doesn't mean that everything goes right, or that nothing changes, or that we can make a deal and then God will obey us. Nah, none of that. We're just like a leaf on the river, and the river is going to take us where it takes us, but what do we pay attention to? The ever-changing shore, or do we just go deep into the river? I was recently in Japan, very recently, and we took what's known as a bullet train, you know, which means boom, it moves like a bullet, like that. And I was, because this was my second visit, but I've seen very little of the country, I was eager to have a window. You really can't look out a window on a bullet train, or it just goes by pretty fast. Mount Fuji actually stuck around for maybe a minute, but that was about all. Everything else just whizzes right past you, you know? So you have no choice. You have to be still in the middle of it. You can't focus like that. What's the difference? You know, our lives are just whirling past us, but who am I in the midst of it? You know, this is Ananda Muhima. Oh, I was always the same. You know, traveling as much as I have recently, just being in Japan, and Keshava and Hazi and Sonia from here were also with us. Keshava and I, we ran out of water. It's not advised to drink the water in Tokyo for various reasons having to do with the mutating your genes and things like that. So we decided to have bottled water. We ran out. We had to walk down to the convenience store. You know, and you have this exotic idea in your mind. I mean, the Japanese don't think their country is exotic. They think California is exotic, but, you know, from here we're supposed to think they are. But we're just walking down the street, and there is, guess what? You know, I was still myself. He was still himself. We just, wherever you go, what do you know? There I am. There I am in the midst of it, and I don't always mean Jesus, just me. my own consciousness. That's the choice we have. If we really want another experience, we have to break free. We have to break free and move into the eternal. That's the demand of the scriptures, and that's the opportunity. And then the Gita tells us how. Concentrate at the point between the eyebrows. Just pull your consciousness in and look into the light, and you see. That's when you look upward and you see that the field is white to harvest already, which means the light of the divine and the bliss of our own nature is waiting only for us to receive it. Bless you.
What is love? Is it only ours? Or does love whisper in the flowers? Surely we, children of this world, could not love by our own powers. What is joy? Is it just a dream? Or does joy laugh in every stream? Are the clouds mindless after all? Or is joy all nature's theme? God is dead, so men say. Can't they see all life's his play? Not a church binds him as its own. Not a creed makes him fully known. Foolish we, if we limit him. Every atom is his throne. What is love? Is it only ours? Or does love whisper in the flowers? Surely we, children of this world, could not love by our own powers. What is love? What is love? Is it love we touch in the flowers?
Home is a green hill, home is a wind, blowing betrayal far, far away. Home is the knowledge heaven is near. Home's the end of the fray. Home is my heart's land, home's where I am. Nothing can dim the light of my soul. Home is forever, home is today. Home's a heart that is whole. Often I dream skies never gray. But when I'm silent, free from all care, I discover my home's every